Hey everybody. So today we're kind of wrapping up how we're going to graph these rational functions without using a calculator. So yesterday you guys worked on delta math, and all you had to do was plot a bunch of points, click a button, and then whoa, magically the function appeared. So today, what if we don't have the magical delta math to help us out? How do we figure this out? So let's run through this rational function, see if we can graph this with no calculator here. So by now we should be getting pretty good at everything. So my x-intercepts, x equals 1. Y-intercept is plug in 0 for x, that'd be 0 comma negative 1/2. Vertical asymptote, that's when the bottom equals 0, so that's x equals -2. My would be, well, this is balanced, so 1 over 1, so y equals 1. And there's no whole or anything for this one, no factors that cancel out. Okay? So let's go ahead and see if we can throw this on a graph. Okay, so, oops, that's it. All right, so x-intercept's at 1. Okay, got it. Y-intercept is at negative 1/2. Okay, got it. Vertical asymptote is at -2. 1, 2. And my horizontal asymptote is at y equals 1. Okay. So now here's the million-dollar question, everybody. And we've kind of been ducking this one. Where's the graph go? Right? Delta Math, we just clicked a button and it appeared. But how do I know where to put it? Okay? So this piece of the graph over here, I could probably predict this one, right? Like, first thing I notice is I have these asymptotes. And asymptotes are great because they're there to guide your graph, okay? They're going to kind of take your graph and say, hey, come follow me. So if I look at this, I know that I have this y-intercept here and an x-intercept here. So I can kind of predict that my graph is going to, go through those 2 points. And then I have a vertical asymptote here. So does my graph go up and kind of hug that asymptote? Or does it come down here and hug it down here? And then I have this horizontal asymptote. So I think I could predict that, this graph is going to approach the horizontal asymptote. I feel pretty good about that. But what about like over here? Is my graph going to live like down here and hug the asymptote here? Is my graph going to live up here and kind of hug it up there? So I need a way to kind of predict where my graph is going to be living. And so how we're going to predict this is we're going to make something that's called a sign chart. And a sign chart is really, it's just a number line. And the values that we're going to put on our number line, let me maybe write this down. We're going to put our x-intercepts and our vertical asymptotes on our number line here. Okay? So my x-intercept is 1. My vertical asymptote is -2. I'm going to put them in chronological order here. Is that chronological order or if it's just numbers? In orders from least to biggest. That's what I'm going to do. And so this is kind of just like a cheap, quick table that I want to make. Okay? So I just want to make this sign chart. And the purpose of the sign chart is to figure out what is the sign of the graph. Is the graph positive or is it negative in these certain intervals? So if I look over here, I want to know what is happening to my graph when my x value is less than -2. Something over here on my number line. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick a number that's less than -2 and just plug it in to my equation and see what happens. So let's pick, I don't know, -3. So if I plug in -3, -3 minus 1 is -4. -3 plus 2 is -1. So I don't really care what the number is. I really care about what the sign is. So if I plug in -3, -3 minus 1 is -4. So that's a negative number on the top. Divided by -3 plus 2 is a negative number on the bottom. So what happens if I have a negative divided by a negative? What? Positive. So what this tells me is when my graph is less than -2, my outputs are going to be positive. Okay? So if I go back to my graph, when it's less than -2, well, here's -2, so here's less than -2. So when my graph is living over here, my sign chart tells me that's going to be positive, which means it's going to be living up here in the positive world. Okay? If it was negative, then we would have predicted that it's down here under the y-axis. Okay? So let's keep going. Let's pick a number in between -2 and 1. 0 is a good number. That's in between -2 and 1. So that's going to be -1 over +2, so that's negative. Again, we don't really care what the number is, just if it's positive or negative. So in between -2 and +1, so in between -2 and +1, my graph is negative. All right, cool. So it's going to hug this vertical asymptote, and it's going to be negative. So I knew my graph is going to live down here as opposed to up here in the positive world. Right? And then it goes through my y-intercept, it goes through the x-intercept, and then let's pick a number bigger than 1, maybe like 2. So it'd be positive over positive, so positive, which we already predicted here. It's above the x-axis, so that's positive. So the sign chart gives me a way to predict where my graph is going to live without using a calculator or a magical delta math button. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and erase the board, and we'll try one more together. All right, so let's give this one a try. Trying to make this a little bit goofier. So x plus 1 over x minus 1, x minus 4. So I factored it for you already. So let's go ahead and get our info. So x-intercepts are at -1. Y-intercept, plug in 0 for x. That'd be 1 over 4, I think. Vertical asymptotes. There's 2 of them. X equals 1 and x equals 4. And then we have a horizontal asymptote, bottom heavy, so that's going to be y equals 0, and no holes to worry about here because no factors cancel out. So before I even graph anything, I'm going to go ahead and make my sign chart. Okay? So again, remember, what goes on the sign chart? X-intercepts, vertical asymptotes. So -1, +1, +4. Okay? And why do we only pick those? Well, the reason we pick those is if you think about a generic graph, just any graph, we're looking at the sign. Is it positive or negative? Well, how can a graph switch from positive to negative or negative to positive? There's only 2 ways that can happen. One way is it can go through the x-axis. Well, that's called an x-intercept, so that's why we put that there. Or the other way is if we have one of these vertical asymptotes, the graph can be putzing along in the positive world and then jump down to the negative world. So at a vertical asymptote, it can change from positive to negative, or if it goes through the x-axis, it can change from positive to negative. But there's no other way that my function is going to jump from positive to negative or negative to positive. So that's why we picked x-intercepts and vertical asymptotes. Okay? So let's go and make a little sign chart here. So I'm going to plug in a number less than -1. How about -2? So on the top, that's going to be a negative number. On the bottom, if I plug in -2, that's going to be a negative times a negative, which is positive. So I have a negative number divided by a positive number, which comes out negative. Plug in a number between -1 and 1. How about 0? So I get 1 over 4. So that's positive. Plug in a number in between 1 and 4. How about 2? So that's going to give me a positive number on the top. And then positive times a negative is a negative. So I have a positive divided by negative. That's going to be a negative overall. Plug in a number bigger than 4. How about 5? So that's going to be positive, positive, positive. So it's going to be positive. Okay? So now I have all my information plus my sign chart. I'm ready to graph this sucker. Alright, so x-intercept is at -1. Y-intercept is at positive 1/4. Vertical asymptote, I have one of them at 1. And another one at 4. And I have a horizontal asymptote at 0. And so there's all my information. So now I'm ready to graph. Okay. So now I have to figure out where am I going to put all of these wonderful features of my graph. So let's look at my sign chart. So my sign chart tells me when my x values are less than -1. So here's -1. When it's less than that, it's going to be negative. Okay? So I know it's going to live down in the negative zone, but remember, it's got to hug your horizontal asymptote. So it's tempting just to draw this negative going straight down, but remember, anytime we have a horizontal asymptote, your graph is going to hug that asymptote. So it's going to stay negative, but it's going to keep close to the x-axis. Okay, in between -1 and +1, my graph is positive. Okay, and we can predict that a little bit because we have this y-intercept that's helping us. And then keep in mind, your graph's going to hug your asymptotes. Your asymptotes are there to guide your graph. Okay, so we get something looking like that. In between 1 and 4, so 1 and 4, my graph is negative, but it has to hug both asymptotes. Okay, so there's no x-intercepts in here, but it has to hug this vertical asymptote and this vertical asymptote. So we're going to get some sort of little parabola-looking guy in between 1 and 4. Okay, because it has to hug your asymptotes, but it can't cross the x-axis again because we don't have any more x-intercepts. So it comes up, it doesn't touch, and then it goes back down the other way. And then when it's bigger than 4, it's positive. So here's 4. So anything after 4 is positive, has to hug these asymptotes. And so we get something that looks like that. Okay? Now, we can definitely check this in a calculator and make sure we're on the right track. If you do, it might look a little bit different. Like in here, maybe this is smoother, maybe this dips down a little bit more. This parabola-looking guy, maybe he comes up higher, maybe he stays down lower. So I'm not worried about getting each and every point perfect, but we need to have key points, and we need to know the general shape. Is it positive? Is it negative? All that good stuff. Okay? I think the key is, remember that your asymptotes are there to guide your graph. Okay? So use those. Don't just draw them and forget about them. Use those to help figure out what your graph's going to look like. Okay? So good luck. You are drawing these by hand today. You have 6 of them to do before I see you next. If you're at home and you're watching this, I hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving break, and I'm excited to see you guys when we get back. Feel free to email me over break if you need any help.